There are moments when time does not move forward, when sound collapses, and the air itself seems to wait for something that will never come. Imagine a city caught in that moment. The sun still shining, the markets still open, children running across stone streets that had stood for centuries. And then, without warning, everything stops. The air thickens, the light dims, the ground begins to shake. Not once, but again and again, until even the breath in your lungs feels like it belongs to another world. You look up, and the sky is no longer blue. It's alive, boiling, collapsing inward. What would you do if in a single afternoon, the world you knew began to vanish? If the city itself seemed to step outside of time, not destroyed, but suspended, as if history itself had been put on pause? This isn't a story from myth or prophecy. It happened, and for nearly 2,000 years, it stayed perfectly still. This is the story of Pompeii. It began like any other morning. The people of Pompeii woke beneath a calm, unbroken sky. The baker lit his oven, the blacksmith's hammer rang against bronze, and children ran laughing through the stone streets. To them, it was an ordinary day, the kind they had lived 1,000 times before, but history would remember it as their last. By the next sunrise, the city would no longer exist, not from centuries of decay or the slow hand of time, but in the space of a single day. And yet, what makes Pompeii so haunting is not just how it ended, but how it stopped, as if time itself took one final breath and refused to move forward. And nearly 2,000 years later, a few words, scrawled on a crumbling wall, would change everything we thought we knew about the day a time stood still. The year is 2018. You stand inside the ruins of Regio, a section of Pompeii untouched for almost 2,000 years. The air is thick with dust and sunlight, the kind that bends through broken arches and half-collapsed ceilings. Around you, the city is silent, as if still waiting for its heartbeat to return. Somewhere, a faint echo of modern life drifts through the sight. A phone playing soft music, a voice calling out for a trowel. The sound fades quickly, swallowed by the weight of centuries. And then, something appears. On an unfinished wall beneath a layer of ancient ash, a thin line of charcoal begins to emerge, casual, almost careless. A mark made by a man who never thought anyone would notice. At first, it seems like nothing. A builder's note, a joke, a passing thought. But beside it are Roman numerals, 16 days before the calends of November, October 17th. And that changes everything. For nearly 2 centuries, the world believed that Pompeii died in August. Every textbook, every museum plaque, every history lesson told the same story. But this single line, written in charcoal, was proof that life in Pompeii continued into autumn. The bakeries were still open. Grapes had already been harvested. The air would have been cooler, softer, the last breath of the Mediterranean summer. And then, in an instant, it all ended. The charcoal inscription, made by a man who likely didn't live long enough to see it fade, had rewritten history. A final correction, written not by a historian, but by someone who never knew his words would outlive empires. For centuries, Pompeii lived in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, a mountain so vast, so still, that the Romans believed it was blessed by the gods. It was a mountain of life, not death, covered in vineyards, dotted with villas, its slopes feeding the city below. No one alive had ever seen it erupt. To them, Vesuvius wasn't dangerous. It was eternal. The people of Pompeii lived their lives as all cities do, noisy, busy, beautiful in their small routines. Bakers filled their ovens with loaves that would harden into stone. Merchants called out prices for olives and wine. Actors rehearsed lines for plays that would never be performed. In the bathhouses, men argued politics. In the taverns, laughter spilled into the streets. Even the walls spoke, covered with graffiti mocking lovers and politicians alike. Life pulsed through every stone, and above it all, the mountain slept, until just after midday. Without warning, the silence broke. A tremor, faint at first, rippled through the streets. Then another, stronger. Pots rattled, water trembled in bowls, birds vanished into the sky, and then the sound, a low, rolling growl from deep beneath the earth. The kind of sound that feels alive. The mountain split open, the sky tore itself apart, and from its heart, Vesuvius erupted, a column of fire and ash rising higher than any storm the world had ever seen. In that single moment, the gods of Pompeii, silent for generations, finally spoke, and the city listened. The first explosion ripped through the silence, a thunder that seemed to come from the heart of the world itself. The ground shuddered. Birds vanished into the sky. A heartbeat later, the mountain split open. A tower of ash and fire shot more than 30 kilometers into the air, twisting into a dark, writhing column that blotted out the sun. It wasn't just an eruption. It was as if the heavens themselves had been torn apart. Within minutes, daylight vanished. Shadows fell across Pompeii like an eclipse. The sky, once a calm Roman blue, turned a deep burning orange, and then black. People screamed, dogs howled, some ran for cover, others froze where they stood staring in disbelief. Then the stones began to fall. They came hissing from above, glowing, smoking, slamming through rooftops, shattering tiles, breaking bones. The air was thick with ash and panic. The streets became rivers of chaos. Mothers clutching children, slaves searching for their masters, masters abandoning their gold, their homes, their gods. And all the while, the pumice poured from the heavens, light as foam, yet deadly as lead. It fell endlessly, blanketing everything it touched, piling up faster than anyone could flee. Doors jammed shut, windows vanished beneath the rising gray, roofs caved in under the weight. Every cry for help grew softer, until it was swallowed completely. By midnight, Pompeii was gone. Its laughter, its markets, its music, all buried beneath a shifting sea of ash. Only the mountain still roared, its fire reflecting in the clouds like a curse, as if the gods themselves were erasing what they had once admired. But the mountain was not finished. Its silence was only the beginning. By dawn, Pompeii was unrecognizable. The city lay buried under waves of ash and pumice. Roofs collapsed, streets erased, silence stretching where laughter once lived. Some survivors, hidden in basements or huddled in courtyards, believed the worst had passed. The mountain's fury had quieted. The tremors had faded. They whispered prayers, clutching each other in the dim glow of oil lamps, waiting for the sun to return. But the sky held no light, only a towering column of fire and smoke that pierced the heavens. It rose higher and higher, until the weight of its own creation turned against it, and then it fell. The column collapsed inward, dragging a wave of molten ash and toxic gas down its slopes. It wasn't a storm. It was annihilation, a pyroclastic surge, a rolling wall of fire that moved faster than any human could run, hotter than any forge man had ever built. In the time it takes to draw a single breath, life in Pompeii ended. The heat was so intense, it vaporized flesh, leaving behind only outlines, ghostly voids in the hardened ash where people once stood. Mothers cradling children, lovers holding one another, dogs still chained to walls that no longer existed. The air itself became death, a suffocating wave that silenced every heartbeat in its path. Stone shattered, glass melted, iron twisted like wax, and within moments, Pompeii was sealed, not destroyed, but preserved in the instant of its final breath. Across the bay, Herculaneum met the same fate. There, the heat burned so fiercely it turned bone to dust before bodies could even fall. What the volcano spared, the darkness claimed. And then, as suddenly as it began, the mountain grew silent. The fire died, the wind stilled, and the world above moved on, never realizing that beneath their feet, an entire city slept, perfectly frozen in time. For almost 2,000 years, Pompeii slept, buried beneath 20 feet of volcanic stone and silence. The world above changed. Empires rose and fell. Languages evolved. Maps were redrawn. But beneath that gray tomb of ash, an entire city remained, untouched, unseen, waiting. And then, one afternoon in the 18th century, a farmer digging for a well struck something solid. Not rock, not earth, but a wall, smooth, painted in red and gold. It was the first heartbeat of Pompeii, returning to the world. When archaeologists arrived, they brushed away the dust of centuries and found color, art, and life staring back at them. Bodies frozen mid-motion. Murals so vivid they looked freshly painted. Loaves of bread still in ovens. Rings still on fingers. Pompeii wasn't ruins. It was a moment sealed in time, a city whose final breath had become eternal. Every step they uncovered was a whisper from the day the world stopped. Each fragment, a human story, perfectly preserved in the embrace of ash. But Pompeii was not the first city to vanish in a single moment. Long before Vesuvius ever roared, another story was told of two ancient cities that burned under a different kind of fire, Sodom and Gomorrah. Cities that, like Pompeii, lived in abundance, their markets full, their towers shining, their people sure that tomorrow would always come, until one dawn, the heavens opened and fire fell, not from a mountain, but from the sky itself. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but salt and silence. Nearly 2,000 years before Pompeii's eruption in AD 79, Sodom and Gomorrah had already vanished into legend, their ashes carried by the winds of time. And when Pompeii met its own fate, In the autumn of a D79, the same silence returned. Stone streets, ash, stillness, different age, same ending. And you can't help but wonder, what if these stories aren't just history? What if they are echoes, warnings written in stone and ash, telling us that the end of an age never begins with chaos, but with comfort? Because even today, in our age of war and wonder, of melting ice and burning forests, of power and denial, we live as they once did, believing tomorrow will always come. But what if it doesn't? What if the fire that once fell from heaven and the mountain that once swallowed cities is waiting again for a world too proud to notice the silence before the storm? That the day time stopped once could stop again. What does it mean for time to stop? For a single day to last 2,000 years? Pompeii is not a ruin. It's a memory, made physical, a city caught between life and death, motion and stillness, yesterday and forever. When you walk its streets today, you don't just visit history, you enter a moment that never ended. Shadows still stretch across the same stones. Sunlight still spills through doorways built by hands that turned to dust long ago. Every echo, every footprint, is a fragment of time that refused to move forward. Pompeii endures not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder that everything beautiful, fragile, and human can vanish in an instant and still speak across millennia. Thank you for walking through time with us. If you'd like to journey further, subscribe and let the echoes of history guide you to the next story.